Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Cosmic Maps. We are back again with part 5 of our Cosmic Maps. So today we are doing the Christ Impulse. And we're talking Christ avatars, Christ lineages, and Christ consciousness. And today's conversation, I'm going to be doing it with Weff, Xaveair. Actually, I think I can invite you here. Yes. He's going to join in today. Yes. He is my co-facilitator for the membership, the Lineage Liberator membership. We're doing really amazing things in there with Weff. So we're going to just come and share a topic that is a huge part of the work that we're doing in Lineage Liberators membership with you all. So say hello when you join in. Are you here, Weff? It looks like you are, but I'm struggling somehow to see your face. Can you hear me, Weff? Yes, okay. Yay!
I'm here.
You are here. Welcome. Welcome to this space. Today we're going to riff on the Christ impulse, the Christ avatars, lineages, and consciousness. Right? So for those who are seeing you for the first time, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Weff Xaveair. I am part of Warrior Mystery School. I've been teaching with Joy in the current Warrior Mystery School for about a year now. I have background in spiritual studies, including occultism, Shaolin training, dream yoga, mentalism, and so I'm happy to be here and participate in part of this live stream, and happy to be part of this Christ Impulse session. And I hope that everyone joining gains something from it, and I'm excited and thankful for this opportunity.
Yay! Awesome. Right. So the membership that Weff is talking about, for those who are like joining for the first time and you're hearing about this is where we are doing really ascension work, right? So this is where we are doing healing, alchemical work, Christ work, to support you in your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual ascension. Right, so a huge aspect of that work is cultivating the Christ impulse, which is what we're going to be sharing with you all today. Right, so if you're wanting to understand the Christ impulse from a different lens, the perspective that we're bringing from Warrior Mystery School is a cosmic lens and esoteric lens that helps us to engage with all the spiritual ideas at a very practical, intimate level. Right, so yes, we're going to jump into the Christ impulse now. So the Christ impulse, what do you want to riff to begin with what the Christ impulse is, as we've been, teaching it and sharing it in the mystery school or the mystery school?
Sure. For me and from my experience, Christ Impulse and everything that we've taught in Warrior Mystery School is based on a desire to know and to understand and to experience truth, right? When we speak about awakening of consciousness, when we talk about ascension, when we talk about spiritual evolution, in the core of all of that, there's this desire to know. And if you don't know, you have a desire to want to know, and you want to know the truth, right? Not to necessarily pick a side that's based on culture, beliefs, background, but to know the unobtrusive truth for yourself and to experience that truth, right? So the Christ impulse is based on much of the solar, as you often call it, the solar Christ energy, which is based on light. When you look at the sun and you see how much the sun rays impact Earth, how much they affect and impact all of life, that Christ impulse is very similar to understanding of that that ray of light, that cultivation that's within us, how it impacts, how it affects you, how it makes you navigate through your life. And for me, the Christ impulse is that desire to know, to expand your consciousness, to understand more, to dissolve parts of yourself that are clinging on to particular belief systems, particular perspectives that really don't serve you in terms of your true ascension path, your true calling for what you are on this earth to do, as well as from higher spiritual levels.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. It's much more bigger than a concept of a personified Christ, the Christ impulse. It's something that's within you, right? That which makes you divine, your spirit, your spiritual self, your spirit man, some people say that. So it's the force within us, the Christ impulse for us. We cultivate it from that lens as a force that is within every human being, that we are actually here to cultivate that force, right? And it is part of the natural mechanics of evolving our consciousness, evolving our spiritual, our evolving along the stream of our spirituality, right? So it's, as I've always said before, it's not something that belongs to, like, say, Christianity, because I mean Christianity has that word even with its name, but it's something that is a universal force within every single person, right? And it can be quite triggering for people, because when they hear the word Christ or they see that word, it's automatically assigned to Christianity, as compared to understanding it as something universal that is within every person, right? So for us, we are cultivating the Christ impulse as that which is within yourself, and that which is actually the stream, the impulse, as the word says, that is actually facilitating your ascension. Right? So we spoke about ascension in our last live stream, about the different paths you can take, which is really the reuniting with God, reuniting with your spirit self. That process, the way we do that, we're actually working with the Christ impulse, and we're evolving our consciousness from that stream. And this is something you can do in and outside the church, in and outside whatever place or spiritual system that you have, because it's actually an internal process that's only happening through you, within you, organically, naturally, through the process of evolution. Yeah, that was a mouthful, but yeah. So that is the Christ impulse, right?
Yes. So I'll add also, again, when we say Christ, and as you said, it's part of church, but it's not exclusively part of Christian perspective. It's in everyone. But when you say the word Christ, you often, to me, subconsciously think of the word cross, right? It's an intersection of different streams of consciousness that align up to create this ball of light, right? Awareness, consciousness. We understand that when you go through certain things, it causes a chain effect of realization. Now, you may go through things that may have seemingly caused you discomfort or pain, or things that may cause you to feel enlightenment or enjoyment. But in that cross of that exchange of energy, there's a certain awareness, there's a certain enlightenment that happens. So again, the Christ impulse is that desire to be aware, and sometimes it's not always easy or fun or enjoyable from that current perspective. But the point is, again, wanting to know for truth's sake, not because you want to look like the best spiritual person, look like the most uppity person, but it's just for the desire to know truth and to experience it.
Yeah, I like that analogy of the cross, right? When we have our spiritual awakening, it often feels like, we are, carrying this cross. It feels heavy sometimes, but also we often have this crossroads that we will enter into, where we have to choose, right? Either you're choosing the spiritual belief that you want to believe in, either you're choosing the spiritual practices, spiritual cultures, whatever it is that is facilitating in the process of cultivating that Christ impulse, right? So that Christ stream is always with us throughout our journey. Of course, we can choose to cultivate it, or we can choose not to cultivate it. And this is kind of like the difference between what would be an organic process of knowing truth or evolving consciousness, and an inorganic process of trying to cultivate your evolution, sort of your consciousness, right? So in our journey, we will be confronted with that there is this force, this spiritual force within ourselves, and we have to awaken it, we have to cultivate it. And the way in which we do that, the cultivation of the Christ stream, has a lot to do with, connecting with the self and confronting the self, going through dark nights of the soul, processing a lot of the pains that we're carrying, processing the ancestral curses, miasmas that we have inherited, and going through that process of purification. And what we're really purifying, right, is we're purifying the body, the different bodies, so that we can hold more and more of our soul essence. We can hold more and more of our spiritual self while we're here, so that we can function as the spiritual beings that we are while we're here, right? Which is the whole purpose of your spiritual awakening, right? Is to actually live as a spirit man, as a spiritual woman, right? So the Christ stream is that process that we're actually cultivating. It's some people call that the chi, the life force, the quantum, just different names to define a stream that is functioning within everyone, that allows us to access these different spiritual powers that are part of our nature, our spiritual nature, right? But we have to cultivate them, which is a huge part of what we're doing in what our mistress call, right?
Yes, absolutely. So as you said, the key is cultivating them, and that impulse is based on that cross, or that surrendering of the illusionary self, of while we're having this human experience and you're going through different things. As I said, we cling on to certain things that are comfortable to us, that are familiar to us, and that Christ energy is about cultivating that higher spiritual consciousness that we all hold. In order to cultivate it, there's a certain level of surrendering and forgiveness that has to happen. For me, in my spiritual journey, I realized a lot of the Christ impulse is based in the solar plexus, but it's also based in the heart, right? Being able to surrender. A lot of us hold heavy, dense energy in the heart based on previous experiences in our life, based on things that have impacted us in our life, and we look and we have a jaded view and we don't realize it. And it takes a certain level of surrendering and letting go to open up ourselves to begin to access that Christ impulse to a greater degree. As Joyce said, we all hold it, but the key to cultivating it and increasing it is that surrendering, that innocence that we all originally come in here with as children. We come in here with what they say, the mind of the child, the heart of the child, that innocent mindset of just wanting to know truth for truth's sake, not to say that I'm better than you, I have more knowledge than you, but just to understand it for yourself. So for me, again, that Christ impulse and cultivating it is based on that principle of really understanding from a conscious solar perspective, of seeing an awakening happen within yourself as well as in others, right? We can debate all day long about which culture, which religion, which spirituality is the correct one, which means is correct, but the Christ energy is based on the truth of experiencing it for yourself. When you experience the Christ energy, it's very difficult to put into words. All you can do is describe the feeling, right? You feel happy, you feel there's a certain level of ease that has happened, but to get to that level of ease, you may have went through seemingly a certain level of struggle, a certain level of challenge, right? So that cultivation is what's happening in that moment of when you're going through a challenging situation, when you're having to face your own dark aspects of your soul, dark aspects of your consciousness that you didn't want to face before. Being honest with yourself. The Christ impulse is very much like looking in the mirror and reflecting and truly saying, this is who I am versus this is who I think I am, right? So to look at those two different comparisons and really dissolve and find out what the truth is, where you currently stand, your current views of your perception of yourself versus who you want to be, what you want for yourself, and being able to find where you're actually at and accept that and figure out why you're in that particular position. That's not always an easy thing, but that's the whole point. Because of that challenge, that's the cultivation of life, of awareness, of a greater informative view of what you're going through from a spiritual lens. And I also want to say that the Christ consciousness, as Joy said, is not exclusively in church. Christ consciousness doesn't come in just one form. You have Christ consciousness streaming through many different things in your life. You can be experiencing Christ consciousness from a career path. You can experience it from as an entrepreneur. You can experience it, of course, in your spiritual evolution of realizing certain jaded perceptions you have had about spirituality, certain cultures that you were pushing yourself away from, but then later realizing that they hold a piece of the truth, a piece of the fragmented collective all of something that you can gain and increase your spiritual gnosis and competency with. So yeah, for me, that cultivation is the key, and the cultivation is not always what we want it to be.
Yeah, because the cultivation, all these practices that we're doing, whether you are constantly meditating, praying, ukupata, going to the rivers, the mountains, doing rituals, ceremonies, all of these actually at their core, they are cultivating this Christ stream, this Christ impulse. But if we understand the Christ impulse as our true self, our true form as divine beings, then we can understand what is the whole purpose of that. But if we don't know why we go to the rivers, why we do what we're doing, then that cultivation may not rise as much as it could if you knew what you were doing and why you even have to do that, right? We are here to cultivate our spiritual self, and that is what ascension is really about, right? So one moment. Oh, I need to drink. Just had something like mouth. Yeah. So yeah, I've spoken about the body of Christ, which different people have different names for that. There's the body of Christ. Some people call it the ascension body, the body immortal, which is so weird, which is essentially this spiritual body that we are building, right? That is you cultivating your divinity, your divine gifts, your divine essence, your divine expression. That is you cultivating the body of Christ, right? The more you cultivate that body, the more you will be more and more of your spirit self and your soul self, which is the whole point of all the great teachers that have come here, which is what we call the Christ avatars, right? The Christ avatars are just really beings or people, humans who were able to cultivate that Christ impulse and hold it while they were here. Doesn't matter how long they held it, but they did. And that is what they were here to remind us, to teach us that we too can do this. And when we have cultivated our body of Christ, our body immortal, this is when all healing can happen, right? Like what we think is like superhero stories and abilities that really just us when we are in the embodiment of the Christ impulse. When we embody the Christ, we do things that are impossible. But these are really just our natural essences as spiritual beings. We just forgot this, right? So your shadow work that you're doing, inner child work, soul healing, ancestral healing, all of it is really to cultivate this. This is the whole point, right? In a way, that statement from the Bible, it says, I am the way, what is it? I am the way, the future. I think I messed it up. What is the line? Do you remember?
I am the way, the truth, and the light.
Oh my God, yes, I'm the way, the truth, and the light. But if we think that I am was really that the Christ is the way, the truth, and the light, and here we mean the Christ impulse is the way, the truth, and the light, then everything kind of changes and you start to understand, oh, like cultivating this, my spirit self, is the way. is how I will experience truth, is how I will experience light in my life, then the whole story kind of like changes, right?
Yes, absolutely. The way, the truth, and the life, and again, the I am. We talked earlier about like the Christian perspective. So as you said, Joy, the Christ energy is all about facing yourself and cultivating that and being honest with yourself. And in the sense of that, the way, truth, and the light, the truth of I am is reflecting to yourself, right? We always want to put, well, in the most Christian perspectives, want to put Christ separate from themselves and make it not their problem, right? It's easy to be dismissive and give somebody else your issues and say, solve it for me, I'm praying and it's going to be fixed. From whether you say Jesus Christ, whether you say ancestors, it's easy for someone to just throw their problem and say, I'm going to give it to them and they're going to fix it. There's a level of truth to that, of the absolute creator, but we understand how it works down here from a 3D lens, that if you want to attain a goal, there's a certain level of work, there's a certain level of effort, there's a certain level of diligence that you have to put in to actually manifest that goal. And the same is true with that Christ impulse. As you said, the people that were able to contain and maintain that Christ energy at a higher degree and reflect with seemingly, as you said, what people call supernatural abilities, spiritual abilities, was a reflection of their diligence to be persistent in cultivating that and to do the, as many people say, do the work. Do the spiritual work of what it takes to actually manifest what you see in your mind, the vision you see for yourself, the person that you want to be while you're having this human experience. What does it take to get there, right? So that is where the challenge comes in, because it's easy to just say it's going to work out someday, but to understand that you actually have to create a process, create a timeline, create a diligent format to where you can manifest that. And that doesn't take away from the divine impulse that will guide you, that will give you advice, that will kind of navigate you, but you can't just expect all that to happen without you putting any type of diligent effort. And even the aspects of the Christ impulse, ironically, it looks for that. The Christ impulse increases based on seeing how dedicated you are. When you have higher aspects of yourself in your consciousness, and you show up when those days when you don't feel like showing up, when you feel very desperate and you feel like you hit rock bottom, but you still show up, that Christ consciousness that dwells within you and is connected to everything else, it takes note of that and say, okay, they're serious now. Now we'll throw this at you and see what you do with that. So for me in my journey, that was a key thing that I learned. Is just like, this is, when we make it seem like we're being tested, we are, but the truth is the greatest person that's testing us is our own selves, that higher Christ impulse. It's testing to see how great your tenacity is, how persistent you're going to be, because how can you expect your Christ impulse to expand? How can you expect to hold a greater amount of it if what you currently are given you can't hold, you can't contain, right? So this is where that true master, the true, as you call it, Joy, the Christ avatars that manifest on earth step in, because these are people who have been diligent, that have been continuously doing that effort of that work to where they increase the capacity of how much Christ impulse they can hold. That this is why a lot of times, as you said, people look at certain people as gurus. They're like, oh, their spiritual prowess is amazing and phenomenal, and it's unfathomable to their mind. It's because that person has been dedicated and consistent in showing up with that Christ impulse. With every challenge, with every difficulty, they hold that and they're able to increase the amount. So when they're getting around people, this is part of why it's called Christ energy. It's almost like they have this light over their head. And people just look at them like in awe, like, how do they do that? It's because they have dedicated themselves in different aspects. Like I said, it could be in business, it could be in finance, it could be in spiritual environments. But the whole point is that dedication, that persistence, you showing up, and it's not even showing up physically for sure, but showing up emotionally, showing up mentally, showing up on, again, like in Warrior Mystery School, we talk about all the different bodies and the mental bodies in our own psyche and in our spiritual evolution. We have the mental, the emotional, the subtle, the soul, all these different bodies, and you have to be checking all of those. That Christ impulse is based on light. And if we understand that all these different mental bodies, all these different emotional bodies are also based on a light frequency, right? So if we're basing this on light, if we're basing the Christ impulse, you can't just think you're going to go in a high level of the Christ impulse without checking your own mental space, your emotional space, being diligent with that, right? So as I always say, the biggest enemy anybody can ever face is their own self, right? You can point the finger at someone else and say, they did this to me, they traumatized me, they don't treat me right, this culture is incorrect. But that doesn't fix the situation, nor does that change your current situation, right? You're just pretty much sitting on the sidelines and pointing the finger and still in the same predicament. But once you start pointing the finger at yourself, really reflecting, okay, why am I perceiving this a certain way? Why do I have a certain amount of anger, animosity towards this? Or why do I want this particular thing so bad? Is this desire that I want for this thing, is this based on the Christ impulse, which is just truth? I just want to be of service to people and to myself. Or is this based on a traumatic event that someone did me wrong in the past and I just have to prove that I'm better than that person or that I can overcome this, right? And there's, of course, a balance, because we do have to test ourselves to prove to our own conscious mind that we can do things, right? So that's, again, part of the process of being persistent, showing up for yourself, having faith in yourself. And that's another thing that I can say about the Christ impulse, is your faith in your own spiritual prowess as well as your own mental and emotional space will be tested, right? This is why the Christ impulse avatars are who they are, because they've been tested to a degree to where, how faithful are you? How consistent? How strong of a faith do you have in what you are going for, what you're wanting to achieve? How serious are you about spiritual work? Are you going to be serious on those days when you're not sure if the bills are going to be covered? Are you still going to be consistent, or are you going to fall? Are you going to break? Are you going to be consistent when the trauma comes up from your father or your mother, and you uncover something that you didn't know was there in the back part of your mind, in the recesses of your mind, and you have to face that? Are you going to say, I don't want to do this anymore, right? That is the key of understanding what you're up against. Is your own self, the different aspects of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't say better. Yeah, that's the reason why in our mystery school we really speak a lot about synthesizing, alchemizing, healing, purifying, restoring, liberating ourselves, because it's really an inside job, right? The spiritual journey is a very inner journey. We can have external influences, guidance outside, and the Christ avatars, they are really just that mirrors for us to see what this journey looks like. The ascension is like the resurrection of the soul, or the resurrection of the spirit, which is part of the course that we did, right? When you are on that journey and you're committed to that journey, it's almost what is it called? A hero's journey, Heru's journey, and Akiyetipa's journey, that a lot of the Christ avatars came and showed us that this is what you may go through, right? And the Christ avatars here, we're talking about the different teachers who came at different ages to show humanity, or to deal with the issues of that age, and show humanity the way out of that, right? So that different Christ avatars, right? We will have a lot of the Indian Krishnas, your Buddha, your Muhammad, and now people, when they think of the Christ, they are associated with the last Christ avatar, who was Yeshua. He's the last Christ avatar because he was here for the Piscean age in the last 2,000 years, right? So because of that, there's this co-opting of thinking that the Christ is about Jesus or Yeshua, whose full name was Yeshua ben Joseph, Yeshua HaMashiach, different names. But that Christ energy, it will continue to also be cultivated, even in the Aquarian age and other ages. And honestly, even in between, there have been other Christ avatars that may not have been famous or known, that also did the same process. And that process, in a way, it's almost like it's a sacrificial process or journey, where you literally have to sacrifice your physical, material man, so that the spirit man can be the one who's here, right? And so that's why this journey is challenging. This process of healing the self, of healing our ancestors, healing our souls, it is it's a alchemical process that everyone is doing, and we've seen guidance and we've seen ascension keys and maps and codes that we can utilize for this process, right? But at the end of the day, the Christ impulse will always ask you to still do it within yourself, right? It's not something that can be I think this is what's really missing in some of our traditional systems, where we have assigned it to just the personification of the Christ impulse, meaning that that light that we're speaking of, the solar light, the light from the sun, can literally manifest into as a human being, and it's essentially what we are all doing, right? But that's not the whole story. That's just one example of it, right? It may be a greater example of it in a way, because we get, as human beings, we like to see things physically. But as I've mentioned in a lot of the maps of the cosmic maps, we are really talking about matters of spirit, and matters of spirit are different from matters of the physical, and they're different from how we see them, right? So when we are talking about the Christ impulse, it asks you to go beyond your mind and how you think about things, and it asks you to also, relearn and learn, integrate these teachings from a different lens, right? And it's a journey to do that, right? And sometimes if you are here and you can feel it, especially the group of people we call the lineage liberators, the genetic path cutters, many of us, we are being called by this Christ impulse. And being called by the Christ impulse is just essentially something, if within you is really drawn to the spirit, it wants to cultivate your spirit self. Something within you is interested in the divine, in God, in being in service to others, right? And that journey is really going to ask you to interact with the Christ impulse. You may actually have a different name for it, right? Maybe you have a name for it in your language, in your culture, but that is the universal way to understand it is the Christ impulse. That's the universal way, right? And the Christ impulse is really the actual mechanics of soul development, of spiritual development, right? So hope that you guys are here with us. Please let us know if you are following, if this is making sense, and if you have any questions, you can begin to send that to us now. What do you want to add something on what I just said? I'll just check some of these questions.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, you said what you said, and that was great. But I can just kind of follow up with something. So the Christ energy and the Christ impulse, as I said, it's the challenge for yourself, right? To step up to whatever vision of light that you have for yourself, and that can come in many different formats, many different ways, in these different avatars of people, as Joy said, that have came through. That impulse to, as she said, there's a certain level of, I guess you could call it a psychological death to a degree, a certain part of you that has to dissolve and make that sacrifice to become that spiritual man, that spiritual woman. Even when you think about it from a very 3D lens of entrepreneurship, if you're going for a business or for a company, there's a certain level of sacrifice and dissolvement that has to happen for you to reach that mindset of what it takes to start a business and to be very business savvy, right? So that is still, to me, there's a Christ impulse. So that psychological death of dissolving different aspects of ourselves that don't serve our greater purpose, our greater ascension path, is one of the keys to getting to the Christ impulse and cultivating it to higher degrees. So that's not always easy, but in the membership and in all the different containers that we have in the Warrior Mystery School, there's classes and courses and meditations that help you begin to access this. And I believe that's one of the reasons why it's important, is because it's not always easy for you to see your own bias, right? that's the key about this. As I said earlier, like, you're your biggest enemy. So sometimes it's difficult for you to see your own bias. But when you're able to take a step back and you're in a container with other people and you begin to kind of reflect on things and take a moment to meditate and pause, a lot of times we're so mechanical. And that's another thing. The Christ impulse is not mechanical. It's not planned. It's not logical. As Joy said earlier, we want to think with our mind, but the Christ impulse is thinking from the soul and the heart, which is a very different way to think. In this day and age, most of us, we're taught to think logically. We're taught to think from a very, if it's not from the mind, it's from a very primitive aspect of survival, right? And that Christ impulse is being able to see that path and be aware of it, but also take the path of thinking from the soul and the heart, of having an innocent and being aware of your current environment, but finding a way to navigate in that environment that still aligns you to be able to cultivate more life. And I'll pause right there, Joy, because I don't know if you got any questions that you want to answer.
Yes, there are some questions here. Let me check this out. So, what is the Christ impulse all about? I think we've answered this one, right? Okay. And then the other one is, who is Christ? Is he God or an extension of God, just like us, with his own purpose and mission? Right. I think even this one we have answered it. One, just that automatically we think Christ is Jesus, Yeshua, right? But that what we are sharing today is that the Christ, especially the Christ impulse, is not really about the personified man who was or who is known as Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a Christ avatar, right? An avatar is someone who embodied the Christ impulse, right? And the embodiment of the Christ impulse, I like to think of it as someone who was the literal incarnation of the sun. Like the light is essentially the Christ impulse, right? And that is what gives lives, what sustains lives, what regenerates life, right? So thinking of that, like that, the sun could incarnate in a human form, and that human form is here to just show us the process of how do we solve the issues of our humanity when we're here, right? These issues are including all the wars, all the disease, all the separation that we're seeing in the world, right? So 2,000 years ago, according to the different scriptures and books that are available, right, there is an idea that 2,000 years ago, there was a Christ avatar who came in as Jesus Christ, who was here to come and essentially alchemize all these issues of humanity at his time in the Piscean age, right? And he showed people almost like an instructional step-by-step way of how do you transcend your suffering, right? So that's how to think about the Christ avatar, or at least a cosmic expanded way of thinking about the Christ, right? It was a human man who was here to do that process, right? In terms of his status as a god or not, that's something that I'm also personally still investigating to really understand how that will be. But the idea of thinking of it as a Christ avatar has made sense to me, right? I know that there's some people who say, yeah, that's a god. That's not something that I've come to like, ooh, that makes sense, that is true. But the Christ avatar is how I understand it. Right. So yeah, what was the rest of the question? Did he have his own purpose and mission? Yes, definitely. Like in the greater esoteric cosmologies, different cosmologies, they do speak about Christ avatars who come and embody, and they are like alchemical characters that are really showing us the journey we are all going to go through. So that was his purpose and his mission, right? And many times I've been in my own process of, confusion and struggle with my own mission. And one thought that has come through as a download was that even Yeshua went through the same emotions we all go through, of confusion and fear and like, oh my God, what is this? Like, we want to make it seem like that whole journey was like easy, but it was not. And that was the whole idea of the story of Yeshua, why it has been so popular and like why there's some kind of resonance. It's just the journey of a hero, of someone who wants to do this process of bringing that Christ self on the earth, building that body of Christ, right? So when we look at it as like an inspiration and like whatever you do choose to do with the story, it's your own personal choice, but understanding the deeper reasoning for it is more important more than anything, because a lot of us, we get lost in just the story and the character rather than what's underneath that story in the first place. What's the essence of the story of Jesus, right? What's the essence of the story of Buddha or Krishna or Osiris or Heru? Like, what is the story behind all of these great avatars, right? Sometimes I also think that one day they are going to be great avatars in the future for our future generations, with people we are living with right now, right? But we don't even know that one day they're going to be bigger than what we are seeing and experiencing. So it's a little bit like that. Yeah. Okay. So, Weff, do you want to answer this one? Is the Christ impulse the higher self?
That's a good question. So for me, there seems to be, and there really is, a lot of confusion when we say higher self, right? In our Warrior Mystery School, we go into details about higher self because higher self is very vague. You have soul, you have spirit, you have different mental bodies and different mental planes, different perspectives. So higher self is just, if you're going to be into spiritual gnosis and understand and be very intentional, there's a certain level of education that needs to happen for yourself of, are you on the astral plane? Are you in the soul plane? Are you in the soul world? When you begin to have visions, where are these visions taking place from the soul level, right? So the Christ impulse definitely is anchored in a particular consciousness in a particular realm. So in one aspect, it is an aspect of your higher self, but it is not just inclusive of just saying my higher self. To me, higher self is very vague. If you're going to be for instance, if you're a surgeon and somebody comes in, they say, oh, my heart is having issues. And, oh, okay, I'll just cut your heart. Like, you can't do that. You have to be very meticulous in knowing what's going on with that heart. Otherwise, that person could die, right? So the same is true when we say higher self and we're using the word Christ. Christ is a particular impulse that we described in this live stream that is very much based on seeking truth and also the path of ascension, right? So the Christ impulse is one of those ingredients of ascension and awareness, but it's not the only one, right? Joy talked about the shadow self, right? Understanding that the shadow is a piece of consciousness, and you can say that's part of your higher self too. But just to say that it's your higher self and just sum it all together and just want to make it a sandwich of it's all the same thing sounds great, but when it comes to actually digging in and doing that work, you're going to need a little bit more details of understanding where's this particular pain coming from. Is this rooted in my subtle body, my emotional body? Maybe it's rooted in both of them, but you have to begin to be the investigator, the detective, and figure out where it's coming from. So like I said, one aspect, yes, it's the higher self, but to understand the higher self is very general and vague. The Christ impulse is more based on seeking truth, seeking consciousness, and cultivating that to a degree of dissolving these parts of ourselves that we want to perpetrate that are the true self when they're really not. Part of ourself that likes a particular culture, likes a particular music, likes a particular belief system, that's not the Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness is able to unobtrusively look at all of them and see the truth for what they are, right? And ask those truthful questions. The Christ consciousness is based on that one person being in the room and everyone else is saying, amen to the pastor, and that one person says, I feel spiritual, but I don't like saying amen. I don't want to say that. What if I say good job? And they're looked at funny, right? So that's the idea, is that person that raised their hands and contests, not just to be rebellious, but to understand why we do things. Joyce said this in the beginning, to understand why. Why do I have to pray every day? Why do I have to meditate? What is it doing for my consciousness? How is this expanding my awareness, my self-reflection? What is this doing on the energetic level, on the spiritual level, on the mental level? So the Christ energy is very much, ironically, the true conscious are awoke, quote unquote, energy is, we're not doing things on a mechanical level. We're understanding why. Why do I need to do this? Where did this originate from? What's the purpose of this? What are people saying that it's doing versus what is it actually doing for me? I can pray every day, but if I'm praying mechanically and just following a script, but I'm not integrating it into my spirit and my soul and actually reviewing myself for review, then it's nowhere near as effective, right? So that to me is the Christ impulse in terms of your higher self, that truthful aspect of yourself that is able to go past these particular boxes that we put ourselves in.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Yay. Okay, so one last question. So Christ impulse, astrology, numerology, hints, signs, thoughts. Okay, so what are our thoughts on the Christ impulse, astrology, numerology? Okay, so astrology and numerology are telling a story of humankind and the story of our planet. And they are definitely maps that are helping us understand the influences, particularly of the planets and the greater cosmos, and how these planets and these higher cosmologies are affecting our consciousness. Right. So in the initiation protocol live stream, I spoke about how initiation is happening from the spirit realm. Right. And so another way to think about it is that these planetary bodies and cosmic bodies that we're seeing, the sun, the moon, and all the other stars, they're interacting with our consciousness, and we can think of them like another way to think of them is that these are like bigger bodies of spirit, bigger bodies of our ancient ancestors or ancient guardians or God or whatever higher force we can believe in, right? So they are all interacting with the earth, and this is interacting with your own consciousness, and that influencing in the evolution of your consciousness, right? So astrology, why it has, survived this long, is really because our ancestors knew that these cosmos, the cosmic systems that are up there, they are literally compasses to show us the journey of our collective consciousness, where even the Christ impulse is at, because the Christ impulse is like a big energy that is sometimes in the earth, and sometimes it's not as big or as much as we would like it to be. The earth is also going through an initiation of her Christ self, the Christ impulse energy, right? So astrology is really just a map of what's happening, and this map affects you as an individual. This is why, we're talking about the full moon is in this placement and so on, and we actually feel the intensity of specific placements in our lives, right? Astrology is also a story of our ancestors, right? It is actually a map of the DNA and a map of events that have happened in the past and potentials of what can also happen in the future, right? And there are different maps that can be used for that. Either you're using tropical astrology or sidereal, but essentially these are maps that are telling us a story, a greater story of Earth, which is also a greater story of us because we are the smaller aspects of the Earth, right? And numerology is also, so in the question of, is the Christ impulse the higher self? What came up was that I like to think of the Christ impulse like the building block of your consciousness, right? Like what the material that makes up your consciousness is the Christ impulse, right? And that material can also be perceived from a mathematical framework, or what we call sacred geometry, right? Fibonacci sequences, the singularities, all of these concepts are really just the study of the Christ impulse, the study of consciousness, and the study of different things that affect our consciousness. So astrology and numerology are representing that. They're representing the evolution of consciousness, and we're constantly studying it. And this is why sometimes when you're listening to someone talk about like numerology of the month or of the year, there is a resonance, and you're like, oh my God, I am going through that. I am noticing that this year is about money because I'm in my personal year of age, right? That is because it's mathematics. These things can be studied. It is a spiritual science, a spiritual mechanics. There is obviously where we can study this, as they are fundamental building blocks of creation, fundamental building blocks of evolution. And yet we are also aware that the divine force is also functioning from greater laws that are not necessarily the laws of man. Sometimes we don't know why some things are happening, right? We don't know why the moon affects us really fundamentally in the way that it is. We know a little bit. We can explain why the moon affects us, and why when we're in Saturn and Pisces, this is what's going to happen in the next 3 years, right? But we also, because of the Christ impulse, as Weff has already said, the Christ impulse also has something bigger beyond a force that we can't study no matter what, right? And this is why you could actually be praying every day, you could be patla, you could be doing all the things, and you could be cultivating your body of Christ, and then suddenly you drop into a state of depression. And you're like, but why? Because I am rising the Christ. Why is it not? Am I not supposed to be in bliss? But that's because the Christ impulse works with greater laws, where it may require that you actually go into those deeper states of depression. That is how you will rise even more of that body, right? But as human beings, we will be very confused. And this is why so many of us get lost in the seeking of the love and light, the blissful states, because we think that's what spirituality is. But spirituality is so much bigger than that, right? Even astrology and numerology will show you that there are seasons. The law of rhythm, this is natural laws, God's sovereign laws, requires that the pendulum of your life moves within seasons. There will be seasons where you have to be in a point which we'll be calling the dark night of the soul. I am in depression, I am in suffering, but you could actually be cultivating the highest level of the Christ impulse in your season of struggle and suffering and depression, right? Healing isn't always love and light, right? And you can, like, it's not, like I said, and we've also said this, like the flow of the Christ impulse is not something we can constrain into a scientific, we figured out how it all works, right? There is a science that we can study, mathematics we can study, which is what astrology and numerology do. But even I am someone who have studied my chart, but even that still does not take me away from the experiences that I go through, right? I can't even predict what's going to happen tomorrow, because the Christ impulse is a force greater than all our maps. And this is why we're still here trying to figure out what is it, right? We're still fighting about what it is. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Did you want to add anything, Weff, on what I was just on that question, and also wrapping up?
Yes, so I agree. And just to add, as you said, the Christ impulse goes beyond the numerology and the zodiac signs and the cosmology, right? But that doesn't take away. My 2 cents is those are wonderful guides and wonderful maps for you to understand your human aspects better, to understand and navigate why you want particular things done a certain way, and see if that's actually coming from a true divine Christ impulse, or is it just coming from one of the blueprints you received as a human, right? Just understanding that can put you in the dynamic to understand that Christ impulse. But the Christ impulse, to me, is the what I would call the X factor, or the unknown. It's going outside of all of that. It is part of this earth, but it's not anchored to this earth. It's something that goes beyond and it steps outside of it, right? So that's why to us, when we experience it in our human form, it's so divine, it's so sacred, it's so blissful, because it's something that is not of this, right? So as I said, you can use the numerology, you can use your zodiac sign, all those different things. You can't take away that they are helpful and effective. And as Joy said, there's ancestry in that. But don't turn that into a religion and a box that you put yourself in that limits, because as Joy said, the Christ energy has the capability to override and shift all of that, right? So to think that you use that as a limitation versus as a guide or a user manual to better understand yourself and the different energies that you're interacting with. So that's all I have to add to that. I'll just add that I enjoyed this. I'm glad for everyone who showed up. I hope you got something from it. Yeah. And again, my name is Weff Xaveair, and I'm co-facilitator and assistant in Warrior Mystery School. And in the community membership, I'll be the main person facilitating that. So if anyone is interested, you'll get to work with me. Joy and I will do Q&A every month, but I have certain activities that people will interact with on face-to-face base through Zoom that will kind of be fun for a lot of people. So that's all I have to add.
Yeah, thank you, Ev. Yes, so one of the things that make this membership unique is that you will have two different perspectives, a divine masculine perspective and a divine feminine perspective, which is absolutely healing in so many ways for a lot of our students to just have two different perspectives, and also two different perspectives in terms of our culture, me being a Black African woman based in Africa and Weff being a Black man based in America. So that makes this space there's something powerful about it. So if you are really feeling called to that, you can check out our membership, right? And if you are a healer and you are really wanting to go deeper into bringing the Christ impulse into your work, the apprenticeship program is definitely for that, right? This is where, because so many of us, the question of who am I working with, who are my guides, all of that, once we come into the unification understanding of the Christ impulse, everything just kind of like sits really properly, right? So you can check that out as well. And I will see you on Thursday for part 6 of our cosmic maps. I believe we're going to be talking about ancestral cases, right? Which, the way that I have actually put the topics for this cosmic map, they add on to each other, because you will understand how you can actually really heal ancestral cases without the Christ impulse. It's a huge part of that, right? So come and see the greater story and how it adds into your own evolution. And if you're really wanting to go beyond, I want to know, to I want to experience, then the membership is for you. The apprenticeship program is for you. Thank you, for coming to share all your amazing wisdom. We're going to go to class now. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everyone.